All right, good morning, Doug. We are back with questions from members of the File, our private member group. If you want to find out more about that, you can go to crisisinvesting.com. Before we get to the questions, and we actually have some comments from the last video where you asked, well, we talked about the political situation. You asked for feedback from people. Tell us where we're wrong, where we're thinking about it incorrectly. So I've got a few of those as well we'll get to. But first, this day in history, Doug, what happened?
Well, for what it's worth, it's the day that William Wallace was executed. So the Encyclopedia Britannica puts up a picture of what he looked like. This was in 1305 when that happened. It doesn't look too much like Mel Gibson, actually, but he was executed today. And also, coincidentally, this is the day that not when Muammar Gaddafi was executed, but it's the day that his compound was captured, that he was executed sometime afterwards. For what it's worth, I'm sorry that this is one of these things where I had a chance, but it got away. When Gaddafi took over Libya back in the 70s, 80s, it was about then. He did so with the aid of, he was a colonel, and I think there were about a half a dozen colonels that joined together to overthrow who was the previous ruler of Libya. Well, doesn't matter. I mean, these African dictators are a dime a dozen, although he's not really an African dictator. He was an Arab dictator. Pretty different thing, actually. Anyway, for what it's worth, one of the colonels, let's call him Mufta, because that's his name, became very friendly with Mufta, another one of the colonels. And at one point, Mufta was made good with a daring escape from Libya and Gaddafi, because it was said that he stole $40 million, which was a lot of money in those days. Well, it's still a lot of money, but not nearly what it was back then. And ran away to Spain. But then later, somehow he reconciled with Gaddafi. And Mufta said, yes, you should, we'll go to Tripoli together, and I'll introduce you to everybody, it'll be fine. And unfortunately, before any of this could happen, Gaddafi experienced a spot of bad luck. So, and at this point, Mufta, I don't think he'd be in good order back in Libya, which most people are completely unaware of the fact that Libya is at least two different separate countries. It's not a country anymore, but nobody ever reports that. It doesn't exist as a country. It's at least two separate entities today, actually probably three. So for what it's worth, that's a day in history today. Some trivia.
Okay. So we get a lot of pushback on our comments, especially about the political system, especially anytime Trump comes up. So we asked, well, like, what's the difference between the parties, or et cetera? And one guy says, Matt and Doug, you asked for some reason to vote for Trump. Well, he says, check out Tim Pool's podcast last night. We didn't watch it, but his basic premise is that you are voting for one of two systems. There's the Democrats, where their leader was overthrown and replaced with an empty pantsuit without a single vote cast, or there's the Republicans, where they had a nasty primary where there was, at the end of the day, an actual vote. So no one is saying Trump is perfect, far from it, but you either vote for a pure autocratic system or you vote for an ugly but somewhat free democratic system. What do you think about that?
Oh, God, that's part of the problem. I mean, the way that it's described, like these are two legitimate choices, quite frankly, and they're not. Look, let's get back to what these parties really are. We have the evil party, which is the Democrats, and I'm sure that the questioner would agree that they're the evil party, but you're dealing also with the stupid party that stands for absolutely nothing. As I tried to explain, I think the last time that we were here, where I was on a Zoom call with three top operatives from the Heritage Foundation and the Republican Party, who were uninterested in talking about anything to do with principles or right and wrong or policies or intelligence. They were only interested in getting the Republicans elected and dealing with statistics and manipulating the public. I mean, I guess they're not actively evil the way the Democrats are, but it's a naive question, and the fact that it's asked in that way tells me it's part of the problem. I mean, the questioner is taking this corrupt system seriously.
Right. Yeah, and I mean part of the way that the system perpetuates is this idea that there's only two choices, and it's always a choice of lesser evils, but you know, it's painted in a way where you feel compelled to participate, to like keep off the worst form of evil. But all it does is perpetuate and validate and like legitimize the entire system.
And anyway, I really do prefer Tweedledee over Tweedledum, and I'll fight anybody who argues with me.
Exactly. Well, and that's some of the other comments we got. So somebody says, and this is not the worst one we got like this, but I disagree that both parties are the same. The Dem Party is pro-socialist, favoring communism. The Republican Party, while not perfect, protects our freedoms and puts America first. My vote will be for Trump.
Oh, that's such a stupid comment. The Republican Party doesn't protect your freedom, for God's sake. In fact, some of the worst legislation in certainly the recent history of this country has been by the Republicans. So it's delusional.
The Patriot Act.
Yeah, Nixon's wage and price controls and devaluation and
the bailouts in 2008, right?
Yeah, the war in Afghanistan. And I mean, the Republicans are perfectly horrible people. They're just as bad as the Democrats. They just have some differing views around the edges.
Right. And here's another one that says, yes, you're wrong, Doug. Neither you nor Matt are in touch with life in the USA. Stick to finance, your true area of expertise. We here already know that we're screwed. You add nothing useful to our situation by your clueless comments and uninformed observations. Even Michael Jan is somewhat out of touch with day-to-day life here, but he would get up to speed a lot faster than you could. Come back here and spend 12 months so you have a better perspective.
Well, to start with, Michael Jan who's very in touch and hip about what's going on, he doesn't live in the US. He hasn't lived in the US for decades. I mean, he barely comes back here to touch base. So the questioner doesn't know what he's talking about, quite frankly. And I'll bet I'm older than the questioner is, and I've lived a lot more in the US just because I'm older than he is. So these are dogmatic questions where people are asking them because they want to hold on somehow to the America that used to be. But we're in the days of California girls and that's all gone.
It's all gone. You know, I was on another podcast last week with somebody, and I said, you know, I love America. I do. The idea of it, like in my nostalgia for it all. But, you know, before I decided to move down here during the COVID hysteria, like I looked around for America and couldn't find it. I was looking, where do you go? What can you do? I couldn't find it anywhere. So I don't know what to say.
No, what the area that's called America is actually the United States, which is just another corrupt nation state like 200 others. America doesn't exist except as an ideal. It's a wonderful ideal, but it doesn't really exist here anymore. This part of the world is actually devolved into a multicultural domestic empire. That's what the United States really is at this point.
Sad but true.
So it is sad. It's really sad.
It is. And you know, let me share this quick video from the DNC before we get into some more questions, because it's something. It was an honest moment, I think. I watched a little bit of the DNC. I didn't watch the whole thing. It's hard to watch these speeches, but I definitely watched a few of them. But this was you know, one of those I thought, revealing moments about about Walls in particular. And they were made fun of his son earlier, where he was like bawling when his dad was calling him, saying he was proud of him on stage. Um, and then you see this moment where he's walking on stage hand in hand with his son to go kind of, supposedly a joyous moment. And you see this. So I don't know if you saw it there, but look the way he pulls him like a misbehaving dog on a leash, for an owner who doesn't know how to actually train their dog or make it decent. He just drags him across like. Now, to me, I have never once done that to my kids where I'm like, you know, pulling them around like that, or to a dog for that matter that I've had. But I have seen parents in my lifetime that do that kind of thing. And, you know, I always have the inclination when I see that kind of stuff that that's person that is like bottling rage, that sometimes slips out. And I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting to that, but I see that element. I just go, who would do that to their son? I mean, it's not just the environment at all. What do you think? Did you think that a big deal or no?
I think it's the evil party, and it's necessarily populated by evil people at the top that are running it. So I think Walls is probably capable of all kinds of really nasty things. That's my guess. I
Do you know
don't know, but
during the COVID lockdowns, he had the police running around the city shooting people that were outside with paintball guns. Did you know that?
I've heard that. He's somebody that thinks he knows what's right and is going to make sure everybody does it.
Yeah,
He's got a
that's scary.
real totalitarian streak running through him.
Yep, I think you get a glimpse of it there. Okay, so a couple questions. What does Doug think about living in a country like Uruguay with little, if any, gold tonnage to back its fiat currency? Is there no need for gold reserves because they have a sound debt to GDP and are politically and economically sound at this time? I looked up the gold reserves. It's like 1/10 of a ton is
which
all
is
that they have.
yeah, which is nothing. And I've got to remark just completely tangentially that it's crazy that they report gold ownership in tons because gold's price is not quoted in tons. It's not even quoted in kilograms. And a ton, it's not used in tons. It's not mined in tons. It's all done in ounces. But it's become a current meme to report it in tons, which makes it even more divorced from practical reality. So forget about tons when talking about gold. The IMF does it, yes, but generally only stupid people talk about tons. Now, if they reprice gold on the exchanges and everywhere else in terms of dollars per gram, okay, then it makes more sense. But tons is inexact. Look, there's what 32,000 troy ounces in a ton, so it's rather inexact to start with. It's better if all these things are reported in ounces. Anyway, tangential comment that's a bugaboo that has always
But
annoyed me.
I think it's important because it's an effort to abstract things out of a understandable reality for your typical person.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And they've succeeded because the average person is just not a very critical thinker who doesn't even ask, well, wait a minute, didn't it use, why is it priced in ounces but reported in tons? And it's really about, well, I guess cheap industrial metals are reported in tons too. Okay, fine, but they don't report platinum or palladium in tons or even silver in tons. Very odd that they do this with gold.
That's interesting. So what do you make of Uruguay, who has essentially zero gold reserves? But does it matter?
Well, sure, it matters at some point because it means that the Uruguayan peso, which happily has not been so badly managed. It's actually at times in the last few years has actually appreciated against the dollar, against all odds. So the people running the central bank are not crazy irresponsible, but it's basically an I owe you nothing, except for what a local merchant will give to you. And of course, in Uruguay, as in Argentina, anything that's important, like real estate, which is important, isn't priced in Uruguayan pesos, it's priced in dollars.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, or maybe a year and a half ago, the interest rates were at 11.25% here. That's what the central bank trying to, make sure inflation didn't become a problem, and that really caused it to strengthen against the dollar. So yeah, the Uruguayan peso is one of the few currencies that's done really well compared to the dollar in the last few years.
Well, it would be nice if the Uruguayan central bank would go out of its way to start accumulating dollar. Well, of course, the Uruguayan government would have to stop running deficits, run surpluses, buy gold with the difference, and eventually back the Uruguayan peso with a fixed amount of gold. But I don't even approve of that. They should just use gold as money. But this is a dream world. It's not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, well, the good thing here is they allow you to use other currencies, and you can settle contracts in whatever form you want. You can settle contracts in gold or dollars or whatever else. It's fine. Private parties can do that here.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's too bad that they're not optimal, but listen, further comment, Uruguay hasn't been nearly as bad as the neighbors on each side, Brazil and Argentina, been blowing up and destroying their currency. But they've destroyed their currency a couple of times over the years, actually. It's gone to basically zero. So this is they're doing better with this latest worthless peso than the last couple of pesos that they totally destroyed, like the Argentines and the Brazilians have done much more than they have. So it's I understand the question. It's a sincere question, but no.
Okay. Let's see. Next question. Says, I've heard a few stockbrokers of more than 20 years standing say that this is the toughest market in the last 2.5 years that they have experienced. What is Doug's take on the current small caps commodity stocks and their returns compared to his experience over the last 40 odd years in the markets?
Well, in the last few decades, what's happened is that the average guy doesn't buy really individual stocks. He buys ETFs or mutual funds or managed accounts. And all of those things buy big companies, because if you're a $1 trillion or multi-billion dollar fund, you can't buy small companies. You've got to buy big liquid companies. So, of course, it's bifurcated the market into really big companies and really small companies. And I think right now, if you're going to find value, you've got to look among the little companies. And when it comes to the resource companies, it's actually, relative to everything else, about the worst resource market ever. I mean, everything's been going up, including gold, including silver, but the companies that mine it have gone absolutely nowhere. In fact, they've generally gone down since 2011. So it's anomalous. So will this be the first time in history that an entire class of stocks doesn't come back? Unlikely. So yeah, I'm bullish on gold and silver stocks and uranium stocks and little baby oil companies. Everybody hates these resource companies because they rape the earth. They I don't know, oh God, it's worse than that. They don't just rape the earth, they rape the natives, and they fight the nice NGOs and worst, oh, maybe the worst, is they all generate carbon dioxide. And everybody knows carbon is one of the deadliest, perhaps the deadliest of all the 92 naturally occurring elements on the periodic table. So
Yeah.
of course they're cheap now. How long
But
will
that'll
this
probably,
change?
that you expect that to change because it just can't continue. I mean, these
Well,
things
I
are,
expect it to change, but I've expected it to change actually prematurely for the last several years, and I've been dead wrong. But on the other hand, I haven't lost any money, believe it or not, because they've been bouncing along at the bottom for all this time. If you look at the VSE index of resource stocks, where most of these crappy stocks are traded, and most of them are crappy, quite frankly, um, it bottomed at about 500. It's around 570 now, but it's gone absolutely nowhere
hmm,
since. So, yeah, I'm long.
okay. This guy says Napoleon once said that morale is to the physical 3 to 1. So I asked you for Friday's video. Which country do you believe holds the highest morale?
Which country? Well, it's not the US or any Western country, frankly. I think we're all demoralized and are being destabilized. So forget about that. I would think I would think of European countries, the highest morale. Maybe pick a country like Poland, or for that matter, how about Russia? Their local morale, I think, probably is pretty high. They still love their country, you know, problems with their government, but their government now is so much better than it's been throughout most of recorded history. So cause for some optimism. What else? I think high morale. I think that Thailand, uh, people people love their king. I'm not a royalist, but people Thais love their king. You know, they may hate their government, but they love their king. They love their culture. I think Thailand's actually pretty good that way. I don't know what country
I think
has
China.
high morale,
I think
unit
China.
cohesiveness, if you would, among the people of the country.
I think it's China.
China.
There's a, yeah, I mean, the Chinese people I talk to are extremely proud of being Chinese. They've got all the economic, they pulled, I mean, how many hundreds of millions out of poverty in recent memory. Uh, they feel like they're on the march. They're becoming the economic, I mean, they really are already the economic juggernaut.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be, I would imagine it's like probably the way America might have felt in the 60s, where they're just like, I mean, like standard of living is improving, quality of life is definitely better. We're on the march economically, becoming a world power. I would think it'd be China.
That's that's a good that's a good guess. But from a practical point of view, just like with Thailand, you can go to China or Thailand, but you'll never be Chinese or a Thai. You'll never be part of the picture as a Guaylo or a Farang. It's just not going to happen.
But maybe that unique character of the people is part of the key in a way to being high in morale, because they see themselves as themselves. They see themselves as a one that's moving in a direction, whereas the multicultural domestic empire of the US doesn't feel that way at all. So maybe that's part of it.
No, because parts of the multicultural domestic empire that the US is feel cyclically persecuted. Blacks used to feel that way. Now white males feel that way. I don't know who's next.
I think it's going to turn far to the right eventually, and then I think that whether no, even if the Dems win, I think it'll turn against the most leftist portion. I really feel like the trans and the LGBTQ. I really feel like at some point it's going to turn against them.
I think you're right. It has to. And maybe we'll find out what something that kind of resembles a civil war looks like. I don't know. It's possible.
It's quite possible. Yeah, I mean, even I mean, lots of people are predicting. We talked about Ray Dalio. Obviously, you've predicted that. I saw, Martin Armstrong is predicting that. So yeah, I think it's inevitable at some point.
Yeah, well, why should we be special and different?
Exactly. All right. Let's see. Next question. What is something that isn't a problem now, or it's such a small problem that nobody notices, but it most certainly will be a problem in the 2030s?
Yeah, what's percolating just underneath the surface that we may not be thinking about? Well, I think the US government absolutely is bankrupt. Large sections of the US population are bankrupt, but it's not talked about or acknowledged. So that's serious. And I think it'll come to light in the 2030s. I think Islam will be recognized for what it is. And I would say that Islam is, a big brewing problem. I mean, it's been a problem ever since the 7th century when, it's always been a war from the time that Muhammad founded it to the present. It's just that it's cyclically risen and fallen in strength and ferocity, and it's getting ferocious again. And they're on the march. I think a lot of Westerners are going to convert because Christianity is nobody really, well, I'm not going to say nobody, but the majority of people. I mean, what's left of Christianity is basically Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and a few things like that. It's not virulent and simple the way Mohammedanism is. So I think a lot of people in Europe, especially, are converting. I mean, we're talking ordinary Europeans. I think they're going to be converting to Islam. So Islam's going to be, I think it's really pernicious. It falls into the same class as communism, fascism, Nazism, greenism. And, Islam is the next thing on the dance card. But like Rosanna Dana said, if it's not one thing, it's always something else. It's always something. So I think that's the next thing. Bankruptcy, war with Islam. I don't know. Oh, well, the vaccines. I think it's going to turn out that the anti-vaxxers are more or less right. Certainly the anti-COVID vaxxers are right. That could be big. A lot of sick people. It's a thought. I don't know.
I think sickness in general, it does seem like the food system in the West and all the chemicals that are in. I mean, even the was it the FDA? Some government agency finally that Alex Jones was right about fluoride in water reduces the IQ of children between 2 and 5 points. I think they estimated. So it's like all of these toxins in the environment. And I think that it's leading to all these diseases that people have that are, whether it's, immune system problems or whatever else. It seems like there's a lot of these problems that are going to flare up as the current generation comes of age.
Yeah, I mean, people are used to eating not really food, but food-like substances, and it may run counter to hundreds of thousands of years of genetic programming to your body to eat certain things. And well, we'll find out, I guess.
I think so. All right. Doug, we've talked a little bit about Paraguay before, but what do you think of Paraguay generally? And in the crisis period that we're entering, what do you think of it as a possible safe haven?
I'm a big fan of Paraguay. It's really different from any other country in Latin America. For one thing, it's the only country in Latin America where the native language, Guarani, is an official language. And most Paraguayans, even if they're not native Guarani, speak Guarani in addition to speaking Spanish. That's kind of interesting. frankly, because countries like Ecuador and Peru and Bolivia and others, I mean, yeah, the natives, which is to say the Indians, who got a raw deal, you could argue, 500 years ago, are getting restless again and don't like the white conquerors. It's funny how long these racial memories seem to last. So I'd say Paraguay is probably more stable from that point of view. It's got lots of Germans, all kinds of Germans. And I've met both kinds of Germans, and they're both really interesting. I mean, if you know
Both
what I
kinds.
mean. And it's kind of isolated, and I like Paraguay. Actually, it's got a lot of land, low population. I mean, kind of sorry that Stressner it wasn't still there, who presented a lot of problems, but it's been chaotic since he's gone away. God, I can't possibly say things defending an evil dictator, but a lot of these evil dictators, considering everything, uh, weren't all evil. I mean, even Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, and all these guys, actually, they're there for a reason.
Right.
So,
We talked about Franco, right? Recently with the Spanish Civil War.
yeah, exactly. Anyway, I kind of like Paraguay. So, I'd say show up and visit there. I think I
Yeah.
think you might I think you might enjoy the experience.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Next question. The world seems to be getting more leaders similar to Gaius Verus than Cicero. If Millet opened the door for ANCAP leaders, what would it take for a corrupt world to see more Ciceros to emerge?
Yeah, so Gaius Verus and Cicero. A little bit of background as a fan of Roman history. Uh, Gaius Verus has a reputation, probably justly deserved, of being one of the worst provincial governors in Roman history. I mean, he was the governor of Sicily, and he apparently basically went on a rampage with looting everybody that was rich and just doing horrible things, stealing things. He was a connoisseur of artwork. He'd steal everybody's artwork. And of course, I'm sure it's true, but Cicero, most of what we know about Gaius Verus, contemporary of Cicero's, is because Cicero wrote about him. So of
Yeah.
course they were enemies, and of course he looks bad. But here's something that's kind of interesting: is that Gaius Verus is painted as a bad guy, probably justifiably, and Cicero were both executed in 43, 44 BC, about the same time as each other, following the death of Caesar, when Mark Antony took over, and he had a pogrom against people he didn't like, and it happened to be both Cicero and Gaius Verus who hated each other. They both bit the dust under Mark Antony. So sometimes you throw out the baby with the bathwater. Anyway, what was the question about?
What would it take to see more Cicero types emerge as compared to Gaius Verus, which is what we seem to see more often in the world?
Hmm. Well, I guess the way the problem was solved was with another civil war, this time between Antony, after he executed those two guys, Gaius Verus and Cicero were both executed. Then you had the battle between Antony and Octavian. So after the Civil War, then you had an emperor, a dictator. And that kind of solved the problem for a while. So what would it take? Well, we'll probably find out in the US. We'll get a real strong man. I mean, things get chaotic in the US, as they probably will. And the average guy is going to say, we need somebody to straighten things up, tighten things up. So we'll get a strong man. Is he going to be a real lefty strongman or righty strongman, or who knows? We'll
But
find
there will
out.
probably be a purge that accompanies them,
Maybe
right?
a
Or precedes
purge.
them.
Yeah, there's usually a purge. Yeah, where whoever the whoever the strong man is, because he's got to clean house a little bit, and that can be unpleasant. Maybe in the United States, we won't kill people. We'll just lock them up for a long time, but lots of them.
Hmm.
Yeah,
A
can't wait to
reason to be out
find
of the
out,
US.
really. Kind
Hmm.
of. Actually, I can wait.
All right. Last real question for you here, Doug. He says he wants his advice whether or not okay, let me just read the whole thing here. I would need your advice if it's worth to keep my son back in Canada or convince him to come to Panama. Let me explain the issue. When we moved from Canada to Panama almost 10 years ago, our business practically exploded due to big savings of taxes and extra motivation we had as a family from working for ourselves. Our son today is about to graduate his university. At one side, if he stays in Trudeau's paradise for a solid 10 years, he will get a valuable lesson paying taxes and to see that his life goes to nowhere. Then he'll be ready to relocate. But the downside is he will have wasted 10 years. If I can convince him to come to Panama now, he can start building his career right away and start saving for his future. I would definitely see him taking over my company in the next few years. But it is also a risk that I may spoil him by convincing him to take that step now, guarantee him a well paid job, help with a nice condo, etc. Additionally, if he fails here, he may hold it against me that it was my idea and not his own. Should I wait a few years until he decides himself, or should I press him to move now?
You can probably speak to this better than I can, Matt, but listening to that question, I see lots of problems. Like, for instance, I mean, the kid's been in Canada being indoctrinated in a Canadian university in wokeism for God knows how many years. And if he stays in Canada, he's going to be swimming in that philosophical cesspool where everybody around him has bad ideas. So it's going to be hard to get those out of his head. And it doesn't seem to me, if you're asking these questions, that you brought him up properly by showing him proper values and teaching him how to think critically, uh, asking whether maybe he'll be spoiled. Well, you shouldn't have to ask that question. You should know the answer by having brought him up. Quite, this is a complex question, and I think you're facing some real problems here.
Yeah, I think it's a tough situation. I think that the notion of that I had or that I grew up in was that, at 18 you're out the door, and it basically an independent economic unit was basically the way it was structured. And I think and to me it seems like the question is in that frame of reference. Your son has been brought up to be an independent economic unit. You'd like him to see him be whether or not he sinks or swim in that environment, and maybe and you would like him ultimately to be associated with you and in your business and continue on. I think the problem is if you start off with this basic thinking that, which I don't have, that your children are independent economic units and that they are supposed to go and sink or swim on their own, then I think you end up in this predicament where he's always choosing how do I say this? It will feel like if you bring him to Panama and you give him a job and provide him these other things, that it will feel like you're spoiling him to both of you. Whereas, like I'm hoping, my kids are still too young for me to know how it will work out. But my son is 19, and I don't see him as an independent economic unit. I see the things that I have, the little bit of wealth I've been able to accumulate. I see as I'm the trustee of that. And my hope is that my children will be the trustee of it later on. And I've kind of brought them up with that attitude, trying to model what I saw Bill Bonner doing with his kids, and Bill has a much larger fortune than I do for sure. But where he's trying to model something and, where he doesn't want the kids to think of themselves as something totally independent. Of course, if they want to go do something independent, he encourages it. But the idea is that this is you're not totally separate. And so for my son, I hope ultimately he ends up, here in Uruguay and is participating in whatever we have here. But, he does have to come to that conclusion on his own by first, exploring the world and making a man of himself and seeing what and building his skills and capabilities. So
Yeah, assuming he's worthy, because this is the problem with, well, this is what always goes wrong with these dictators. We've earlier mentioned Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. They had sons, and the sons were completely rotten, spoiled, just much worse than their father was because of the environment they were brought up into, where they thought they were to the manner born. So you have to be really careful about that.
well, that's where the Roman tradition of being able to adopt adults' children, right? They could carry on the family name and the family fortune, right? That was the idea behind that, is that you could choose worthy heirs.
Yeah, and if you felt the kid wasn't worthy, you could expose him on a mountainside. And
Exactly. Right. They were not they were pro-choice long into adulthood, right?
that's that's right. So I think that I think you've got I think the questioner, it sounds from the question, we may be completely wrong because maybe the question is not well phrased, but I think that the questioner ought to sit down and assess things in the cold light of day, because it's kind of a confused question. I think he's looking at there's trouble brewing here, unless it's
Yeah, that's a good point.
bring your kid down. I mean, you're going to get, what are you thinking? Give the kid a whole bunch of stuff that he has done nothing to deserve? I don't know. This is all unclear to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what he says. He says, like, spoil him by convincing him to take a step now, or guarantee him a well-paid job, help him with a nice condo, etc. So yeah, that's what he's
He's
doing.
going to resent you for it. I don't think that's good thinking.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the hard part is that you have to be more on the same page with your kids the whole way through, so that they're not um so that you do, because a lot of what people try and do is to get their kids back in their life, just like they tried to keep them in their life when they were young, was to bribe them by giving them things that they think that they want. And that whole, trying to maintain a relationship with somebody out of carrot and stick is just doesn't work.
Yeah. But hey, wait a minute. According to an earlier questioner, we're kind of getting out of our lane here. We
Yeah.
should be talking about financial stuff, uh, stock
Yeah.
touts. That's what the earlier questioner really wants. Doesn't want intelligent conversation and analysis of the world. He wanted stock touts. So we should get back in our lane.
Exactly. We'll have to save that for next week, I think. So,
Right.
all right. Well, good, Doug. I appreciate it. Thank you for the conversation, and we'll be back next week, maybe with stock touts.
Well, I wouldn't rule that out, but that's for file members, not for the hoi polloi.
That's true. All right. Well, have a good weekend, Doug. We'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.